Well, hello everyone and greetings. My name is Tim Riley. I am the Director and Chief Curator at America's National Churchill Museum at Westminster College here in Fulton, Missouri. And I'm joined today by Antonia Keaney, my good friend from Blenheim Palace in the UK. This is truly an international gathering. This webcast is part of our programming to commemorate the 150th anniversary of Sir Winston Churchill's birth this year, 2024. But Antonia, you chose this day, September 12th, really, to have this conversation about Winston Churchill and his connections to Blenheim, because really, this is a different anniversary, is it not?
It is. It's a very, very special day. Not only is it my daughter's wedding anniversary, but in fact, it is the wedding anniversary of Winston Churchill, Hosier. And they were married on the 12th of September, 1908, in St. Margaret's Church, Westminster, in London. So they weren't married here, but by this time, they were here because they traveled here for their honeymoon, and they spent the first 2 nights of their honeymoon at Blenheim Palace.
Well, that's terrific. So today, being the anniversary of Winston Churchill and Clementine's wedding anniversary, it's very, very appropriate that we have this conversation. I know you are at Blenheim Palace. Tell us a little bit about where you are within the palace, and I can then talk about where I am here at the Churchill Museum.
Of course. So I am literally in the Undercroft. So if you think of a stately home, you have the very smart and we've converted it into a really splendid Winston Churchill exhibition. So you can walk through the exhibition and it tells you everything about him from the minute he was born here at Blenheim Palace, right until, very sadly, his death. But it's a fabulous exhibition, and you can see I'm surrounded with his luggage. I've got pictures of him all around me, and there is actually a full-size waxwork model of him, which is slightly scary, but it's just sitting across the corridor from me now.
Well, in that Churchill exhibition at Blenheim is really an extraordinary way to look and learn about Sir Winston, not only his connections to Blenheim, but of course his entire life and legacy. I'm here in the above ground in the loft of another 17th century building that was removed from London and brought all the way to Westminster College here in Fulton, Missouri. It's a Christopher Wren's St. Mary the Virgin Aldermanbury. This wonderful 17th century building stood proudly in London for centuries until it was bombed in World War II. In the Blitz, stood in ruins in London and put back together stone by stone, and it is a tribute to Winston Churchill and his Iron Curtain speech, which he gave here at Westminster College. So we're both in 17th century buildings.
We are indeed.
How unlikely. Well, back to the wedding.
Or does it need as much maintenance?
Well, we do all have our moments where there are maintenance to these great buildings. Back to the wedding. Clementine Churchill and Winston, or Clementine Hosier and Winston Churchill, it was really an event in London. And the wedding made the newspapers, and there were people in many ways lined the streets to catch a glimpse of them. Not quite a royal wedding at all, but there was news to be made, and this was certainly published in the social journals of the day.
Yeah, very much so, and it was attended by royalty. And as you say, it was reported in the journals of the day, and articles. One of my
Antonia, we are having a few moments. We missed a little bit of that. I know that you're in the Undercroft there, and I think we missed a little bit of your audio. But I also understand that Pete, your colleague and great photographer, is in the actual exhibition galleries too, and may have some images of the exhibition.
He's just going to make his way over to the area that deals with the wedding. But no, I was saying that, in fact, it was And it was reported that Winston's wedding attire was not a success. And very unflattering, really.
Yeah, I mean, we actually have a photograph here too of Winston and Clementine at their wedding. If you look, you're right. The tabloids were not kind to Winston Churchill's attire, even though he looks rather smart by today's standards. I think they called him a glorified coachman, and we're showing an image on our end of Churchill getting out of his carriage and Clementine looking resplendent in her wedding dress, entering the Church of St. Margaret's, and then we're also have a famous image of Winston Churchill and Clementine exiting the church, and he has a little puzzled look on his face, but they are making their way to Blenheim, where, as you say, they celebrated the first days of their honeymoon together. But Winston and Clementine's relationship to Blenheim didn't begin on their honeymoon, did it? I mean, actually, the proposal actually happened on the grounds of Blenheim Palace.
It did indeed, and again, there's a very nice story attached, which is a beautiful, almost a folly, you would say, but it should have happened. For a few days. And he assured her that the only people that would be present were his cousin, the 9th Duke, their very good friends, Lord. Also, Churchill's mother was present. So Winston invited Clementine to join him for a walk before breakfast on the 12th of August, 1908. And Winston being, sorry.
We are having a little, we were fading in a little bit about, we talked about the walk, and famously they went outside to, I believe there was a rainstorm, if I'm not mistaken, and they took refuge at the Temple of Diana on the grounds. And it's this wonderful monument, and it was really there that Winston Churchill proposed.
He did propose. Clemmy was, she thought it might happen, and she could see a beetle making its way across the paved floor. And she said to herself, if the beetle gets to that crack, he'll propose. And of course he did. She asked him not to say anything because she wanted to let her mother know first. And Winston said, absolutely. And then as they started to make their way back to the palace across the south lawn, across the grass.
And Churchill famously blurted out that, yes, oh my gosh, he told the world after pledging to be silent that that the cat was out of the bag, if you will. So, you know, it is appropriate that we talk about Churchill and his relationship to Blenheim on this anniversary day. But let's go back, really, in time to talk about the beginning. Why Blenheim? Why and when was one of the grandest homes in all of England, where you are, built in the first place?
Okay, so we go back. The building started in 1705, and it was a gift from a grateful nation. So the first Duke of Marlborough was John Churchill, and he was a great general, a great leader of men, and he defeated the French at the Battle of Blenheim in August 1704. And because it was such an important turning point in the War of Spanish Succession, the Queen, who was their very great friend at the time, before things went horribly wrong, she decided to give him 2,000 acres of land and £240,000 to build this amazing palace. So that's how Blenheim came to be. The 7th Duke of Marlborough, who was Duke from 1848 until 1883, was Winston Churchill's grandfather. He and his wife had 11 children. They had 5 boys and 6 girls. And of the two surviving boys, Randolph was the younger son, and he was Winston Churchill's father. Now, Winston never actually lived at Blenheim Palace, and I think this is something that people often don't realise. It was his ancestral home, but it wasn't his home. And his parents were here for a St. Andrew's Day ball, and Jenny went into premature labour, and they made her comfortable in a relatively modest room. And it was a room that had been used by the first Duke's chaplain, and she gave birth, and the rest is history.
It really is extraordinary that Winston Churchill decided that the ball was happening and I think wanted to be a part of it. So he was born, which is a wonderful, wonderful story. Going back to the first Duke, John Churchill, whose image is well known and depicted in statues and sculptures and paintings throughout the palace. He was someone that Winston Churchill constantly looked up to.
Yes.
And I think identified with in many ways because of his victory at the Battle of Blenheim. We have actually in the exhibition that we're opening next week a wonderful medallion depicting John Churchill, the first Duke's victory at the Battle of Blenheim. This medal is depicting Queen Anne, who gave the palace, on the obverse, and on the reverse we have the wonderful image of the victory of Britannia holding the victory figure and the vanquished French and Bavarians down below. This victory against all odds, John Churchill's victory was one where he was the underdog, captured the imagination of Winston Churchill and I think stood with him a great deal. And one of the reasons I think Blenheim Palace and his ancestral home, as you say, he never lived there, but was so important to Winston Churchill throughout his life, from birth really to death.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Churchill had a romantic streak. And as we've said, he didn't live here, but he spent an awful lot of time here as a child. And if you can imagine this vast palace with all its wonderful tapestries and all its kind of iconography, there are shields and armor and whatever everywhere. And that must have fed his imagination. And then as he got older and he became more and more interested in his history, in his family history, he felt that he had somehow inherited the leadership qualities of his ancestor. And as I say, we have these amazing tapestries at Blenheim. They're floor to ceiling, and they commemorate the first Duke's victories. And everywhere this child would have gone, there was something telling him about how great his ancestor was. And there's a story that he developed a game at Blenheim, and it was called The English and the French. And it was a little bit like a rugby scrum or like your American football scrum. And there were two rules. One was that he was always the general, and the second rule was that there was no promotion. So whatever happened, he was always going to win. And I think, it sums his character up, the confidence, and he grew up thinking that he was destined for great things, and my goodness, wasn't he?
Yes, he certainly was. And, and the palace itself, I don't think, if you haven't been, and a lot of North Americans in our audience watching have not perhaps had the pleasure yet of visiting, the grandeur and sheer size of the place is amazing. You're in the Undercroft galleries there, but we have actually in the exhibition that we're opening next week a model. It's a scale model of Blenheim, which we're showing now on the screen for viewers. It's 1/4 inch of this model equals 10 feet. So the massive size of this particular palace that Churchill was inspired by is incredible to behold. It really can't be underestimated that this is really one of the grandest houses in all of England.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. We had, I mean, just to give you an example, and this is going back to the 18th century, George III visited Blenheim with his wife, Queen Charlotte, and he saw Blenheim and was quoted as saying, "We have nothing to equal this." And he went back to London and he improved both. So, you know, Blenheim even gave him a little bit of a boost and made him go and sort things out.
So Buckingham Palace is a little bit of the catch-up to Blenheim.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible. Going back to Winston Churchill's parents for a moment, Lord Randolph was the son of the Duke, as you mentioned, and Winston Churchill's mother was an American, Jenny Jerome, who was from Brooklyn. And we have a lovely photograph of Lord and Lady Randolph shortly before they came to visit that night in November for the party, the ball, and Churchill was born. This is an image we're sharing with our viewers right now of Jenny Jerome, a lady there with sitting at her side with Lord Randolph, Churchill's father. And actually this is a trio. This is Jenny Jerome pregnant with Winston. So this is not long before the birth. And it's really, in the image we're showing, one of the first images of Churchill, not yet to be born. But it was a wonderful opportunity. And as you say, Churchill was rather unexpectedly born in a rather modest room. The Churchill birth room at Blenheim is not one of the grandest rooms in the palace, but it's rather modest, is it not?
It is. Tim, when Blenheim opened to the public in 1950 on the 1st of April, and they tried to get everything ready for that day, and the birth room wasn't quite ready, and the 10th Duke, who was a cousin, said to him, "Can we use these other rooms instead?" And Churchill said, "No, if you do, I will tell the world you are lying." So he was insistent that we showed the correct room. And may I just read a little passage from a letter that Lord Randolph wrote to his mother-in-law?
Please.
As I say, completely unexpected. And he says, "Dear Mrs. Jerome, I have just time to write a line to send by the London doctor to tell you that all has, up to now, thank God, gone off very well with my darling Jenny."
We've lost you a little bit with, yes, it's and that type of detail and having those letters preserved is extraordinary to know. So, the famous line that Churchill talked about, he made two important decisions at Blenheim. One is to be born, the second to be married. He was satisfied on both occasions, I think, is one of the famous. And that letter speaks to that very, very clearly. Continuing on this idea of Churchill and his relationship to Blenheim, in that period of the 1930s, in late 20s, early 30s, when Winston Churchill was still an MP, but booted from ministerial office. He was a backbencher. He called it his political wilderness years. He visited Blenheim often and painted. There's a wonderful painting of the tapestries you mentioned, where Churchill paints the tapestries at Blenheim. We actually had this painting, which is now in a private collection here in the States, on view here at America's National Churchill Museum a couple of years ago. But it shows the splendor and the grandeur of the palace, but it also shows Winston Churchill's creative side. He was a really lovely artist, and this painting and Blenheim captured his imagination, to be sure. And there's also, I think, a small little drawing that you know quite well, and we're going to show it on the screen for our viewers, that Churchill did, and maybe you can describe it for us.
Yes, I can. It's laid. I believe that Churchill did this for the second wife of the 9th Duke, so his cousin. And she bred Blenheim Spaniels here at Blenheim Palace. And I got it from a private collector, and it was amongst some of Gladys Deacon's papers. And I just think it's absolutely charming, you know, this little squiggle and this little porky tail almost. And it just speaks volumes for me and captures his wit and his charm,
It did.
and his
It
eye.
does. And
Yeah,
the drawing itself, if we could show it again, it's this large spaniel, but the writing,
yes,
which I think is in Churchill's hands, has a Blenheim-fed spaniel. So he was indeed very, very
yeah,
well fed. And as you say, that's the punchline here. It shows Churchill's wit and his creative and artistic side.
yeah. And you know, Gladys had in the staterooms, and you would have been greeted by that sight when you came into the Great Hall, which probably wasn't everyone's cup of tea.
Right. The, in the 1930s also is when Winston Churchill, again out of office and out of power, if you will, he's still an MP, that's when he writes one of my favorite books. It's a 4-volume set of Winston Churchill's, about Winston Churchill's great ancestor, the first Duke. And those books, the Marlborough volumes, detail in great detail the victories of the first Duke at a time when Winston Churchill, interestingly enough, from a historian standpoint, is observing in the 1930s what's beginning to happen on the continent in Europe as Germany rises, as Hitler and the Nazi power continues to expand its power. And Churchill famously in the 1930s is warning anyone who would listen of this looming Nazi threat. He's imagining and writing the volumes of the first Duke, who, of course, against all odds, was victorious at the Battle of Blenheim. I think it's extraordinary that, again, Churchill's using Blenheim and the history of the place there and his ancestors, almost as inspiration to inform and inspire him as he's pondering what's next in
Yeah.
what would be one of his greatest challenges and trials.
Well, if you think that John Churchill prevented the French taking control of Europe, I suppose, you know, there's the parallel that Churchill helped prevent Germany taking control of Europe. And he, you know, he really did believe that he was walking with destiny
He did, and when you're surrounded with,
to do.
when he's surrounded with such history and such rich history, and with such successes as he saw, but also some challenges. I mean, there were many dukes throughout the course of history that had some financial troubles and had to sell some objects to raise funds to keep the palace afloat, which also is a parallel with Winston Churchill, who from time to time had his own financial struggles. So there's a lot of parallels, I think, to be made between Winston Churchill and Blenheim and his ancestors.
I think also, so the first Duke's father, so that's the very first Sir Winston Churchill. You know, he also had all sorts of issues because he backed the monarchy during the Civil War. You know, and that was a huge mistake. And it was a for his children, and that's where John Churchill started to rise and make his fortunes. Indeed.
And the story of Churchill's connection to Blenheim, you know, starts with his birth. Well, it starts with his ancestors, of course, birth and the wedding, which we've talked about. But it also continues to this day in some way, because not just outside the gates at St. Martin's in Blaydon, Churchill to this day is at rest. I mean, his tomb is located just outside the gates. So he was not only born, but he also, in some ways, is his final resting place at Blaydon, and he continues to have an association with Blenheim to this day.
Which is just about
The
south side of the palace, you can see the church where Churchill's buried. So he's still got that connection. And if you take a line from Church where John Churchill stands atop a pillar. So, there's a whole, it's come full circle, really.
It is. It's extraordinary. When you're at that column, the victory column, and you look down and realize that it's John Churchill to Winston Churchill, the parallel is moving. The funeral, of course, of Winston Churchill was a grand affair. It was a state funeral that was afforded to Winston Churchill in 1965 when he died, and very public. Some viewers remember seeing it on television.
Yes.
This very splendid affair, and the boat going down the Thames and the cranes bowing, the actual service itself in St. Paul's. But the interment, the actual burial, was a private affair at Blenheim. It was not open to the public, but only family. And we actually are including in the exhibition here that opens next week a painting done by Johnny Churchill, Winston Churchill's nephew, of the moment where Winston Churchill is being interned, and the family is queued up, ready to pay their final respects. And Clementine Churchill is looking over the grave, and it again is that poignant moment where Churchill, in some ways, returns to Blenheim, or at least the Blenheim environs, to pay his final respects.
And of course, the 10th Duke of Marlborough was there. The Lord Blandford, who became the 11th Duke, was there. Lord Charles was there, the present Duke's uncle, Lady Rosemary, the present Duke's auntie, etc. So the whole family, so not just Winston's direct family, but if you like, our family as well, were there. And, you mentioned the fact that he had a state funeral, and let's not underestimate how important that was, and what a huge mark of respect, because that's not something that's accorded to a commoner, and which, on the great scheme of things, if you relate it to the royal family, Winston only became titled in the 1950s. He was Mr. Churchill until then, and in the UK, it falls to the Duke of Norfolk to make these arrangements. So, for example, when there's a coronation or when there's a state funeral, it falls to whoever is currently the Duke of Norfolk. And there are some lovely stories, lovely anecdotes about Churchill, who knew that he was going to be given a state funeral. And he used to go along for meetings with the Duke with a folder that he called Operation Hope Not. And on one occasion, he said to the Duke of Norfolk, "If I predecease mon général, i.e. General de Gaulle, will he be invited to the funeral?" And the Duke of Norfolk said, "Well, yes, of course. He's a head of state, of course he will come." And then Churchill thought about it for a moment, and he said, "From which station in London will the train leave to come to Longhambra, which is the station here?" And again, the Duke of Norfolk was very perplexed. What a strange question. And he said, "Well, it will leave from Paddington." Churchill took a moment and he said, "If mon général attends, it will leave from Waterloo." And that is the first and only time that has happened. So even, he really had the last laugh.
Oh, he did. And that's just a pure, great example of Churchill's wit and wisdom and thinking, even in the end, it really is.
Beyond the grave.
Beyond the grave, indeed. Yeah. The other thing that fascinates me about Winston Churchill and Blenheim is that so many visitors come to visit the palace, not only to see the exhibition that you're in, but the rest of your programming. It really is extraordinary that Blenheim today is really much more than a place for pure history. I mean, people enjoy it and experience it, but your mission and purpose is well beyond the scope of history. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening at the palace today that transcend Churchill even.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that we had here recently, so about a month ago, just over a month ago, we had the European Political Conference, so the European Summit. So this saw 47 world leaders attending a conference at Blenheim. Now, in a way, you could say that's right up Churchill Street, but it was just phenomenal. So we are often the venue for huge events, and those events might be weddings. We are often a location for filming. We have flower shows, we have food shows, we have car shows. We've got the Blenheim horse trials in another week's time. I mean, the list is absolutely endless. And then come mid-November, we dress the palace for Christmas. We have a light trail that goes all around the gardens. It's just, absolutely relentless. And I'm sure some of the people listening would recognize Blenheim on some of their favorite movies and some of their favorite Netflix programs. If there are any people that like Bridgerton or Queen Charlotte, then you'll see Blenheim there. We featured in Spectre, so we had Daniel Craig here with his Aston Martin. There's never a dull moment here.
There's never a dull moment, indeed. And I really like the fact that, as you say, Churchill himself might appreciate and be pleased that, say, the European political gathering was there. I mean, what a great assembly of world leaders. I think Churchill would have felt at home, and we're showing an image right now to the viewers of all the leaders gathered out front the main gate, standing, and I think you can almost picture Winston Churchill smiling and knowing that his family's history and Blenheim and this place continues to play a role on the world stage. One of the other things that strikes me about Blenheim today that is interesting to viewers is all the extraordinary work you're doing, not only with programming and conferences and European things, but also with sustainability and some of your other projects. The pledge to combat climate change and other things. You're really kind of on cutting edge. And I think Churchill too would have appreciated the science and the technology that you and the team at Blenheim are putting. There's AI involved with your visitors. It's really extraordinary.
I think it's worth bearing in mind that Churchill's uncle, the 8th Duke, was a scientist. And so Churchill would have been aware of the fact that he was communicating with Edison about the development of the phonograph and things like, and ready to embrace any technology, any innovation. So yeah, I fleet of 11 cook and sell in our restaurants, etc. So we do whatever we can. We try and encourage people to come here by public transport, and we will reduce their. We are doing what we can to try and mitigate, just life, really.
Well, when I visited you in a few weeks ago, and you were kind enough to show me through, I did come by public transport. I came by train, but not from Waterloo, I'm afraid. But I did come by train. And what I'm also was really impressed with was the sheer number of visitors and people who are experiencing all of the good work that you're doing. And it's a chance for people to live and breathe and understand and learn from the past, which I think that Winston Churchill also believed in greatly. Yes,
yeah. And he has said about history shaping our future. And, he didn't have a great record at school, but one of the things he was very good at was history. I mean, Latin less so, but certainly history was one of his subjects. Without a doubt. And, I think we mustn't forget also that he is Anglo-American.
Right.
And we have had more than one American strong between our two nations.
Yeah, that Anglo-American, that the duchesses who have been American, famously, I think many Americans will know about Consuelo Vanderbilt of the Vanderbilt family, who became Duchess. That marriage didn't last.
No, sadly not. But, I mean, again, I must thank you for Consuelo, because although the marriage didn't last with us, and even into the 1920s, when the ninth Duke had remarried, he was still using her money to create water terraces and, refurbish. Uncle, the eighth Duke, his second wife was a young American widow called Lily Hammersley. And again, it meant that built a boathouse. He installed the magnificent organ in the long library. So we have a lot to.
Yeah, yes, I think as Churchill himself said late in life, never be separated from the Americans. And I think he was thinking geopolitically and also from a democracy and some of the values that our two countries share. But in Blenheim's case, it was certainly from time to time a very fortuitous economic benefit as well by some of these Americans. And the same was true to a degree with Lord Randolph and Jenny Jerome and the Jerome families, Churchill's mother, being from a well-to-do New York family. And so this history, this joint heritage and union between the two countries is made manifest in great ways with the family, but also in so many other ways, as we see in your great work.
Sorry, Tim, I lost you there just for a moment.
Okay. Well, I think we for those who are watching this webcast via YouTube, just a reminder that if you put your comments, or if you have any questions for me or Antonia, we'll try to entertain them. I have a couple of here lined up I see that have come my way, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Now's your chance to ask Antonia from Blenheim, who lives there, lives near there, probably feels sometimes like she lives there, your questions about Blenheim. I have one from actually a Westminster College student here at Fulton, who asks, I think, a personal question for you, Antonia. Have you met the Duke, and what is the Duke doing today? The current Duke of Marlborough.
I saw him earlier today, and I was with his aunt, Lady Rosemary, who is 95 years old. His funeral. She was also a maid of honor at the coronation of the late Queen, and never dare do. And the Duke came out and they had a little chat, and then the Duke had to go off and he was chatting to some of the organizers of the electric vehicle. Which is
so
rare occurrence.
There you have it. That so the Duke continues to be, the current Duke of Marlborough is very much part of the palace, and that's great. Again, I encourage anyone else, if you have a question, we'd be happy to answer them, in our chat here. Going back, Antonia, to Churchill 2024. And this sesquicentennial celebration of Winston Churchill's birth. What other programs have you been doing, and have you seen an uptick in interest in Churchill with this anniversary?
Our USP, it's our unique selling point, and we still have visitors that come to Blenheim. A series of podcasts. So on the 30th of every month, a new podcast has gone out, which is Churchill related.
That's, I mean, and that kind of programming is great. And I've listened to a few of them, and you have some brilliant guests on talking about Churchill and in all aspects of his life and legacy. And we're doing some of the same things here, and seeing a great chance for us to talk about Churchill and his relevance today. I saw the news last week of some who are questioning his leadership in the Second World War, and I think it's a chance for us, places like Blenheim and places like this one, are chances for us to look at the original artifacts, to read the original letters as you've shared with us, and see from the source a little bit about the past and learn from it. That's what Churchill did when he was examining and doing his research about Marlborough and his biography about his father. Those primary sources really move us and touch us, and there's nothing better than a primary source like Blenheim or like this church here, to inspire visitors. And I think it's a great chance for those of us who are fortunate enough to work in these kinds of institutions to carry that legacy forward and share those items that are eyewitnesses to the history.
I think you're absolutely right. And for example, actually handle and see things that you think, wow, Churchill has had. And there are documents there written by Sarah, the first Duchess, or John Churchill. And, Winston Churchill was very lucky when he was researching the life of the first Duke. The archives were here, but now the papers of the first Duke are in the British Library. So he was so incredibly fortunate. I can imagine, the hairs on the back of his neck standing across.
I have another, another question that has come in, and someone was asking about the condition of the palace and the upkeep, because I know throughout the history there's always been a care for something of a building of that size and scope, and the roof and the stone and everything else. Tell us a little bit about the condition of the building and what you're doing to make sure that it's preserved.
I would say the palace is in pretty good condition. We have major restoration projects on the go all the time. And again, history repeats itself, because the reason we opened in 1950 was to fix the roof. Recently, we had the lake dredged, cost millions of pounds to do that. There's always something. If you think about the maintenance in your own home and think about the cost of it, and then multiply it by several million,
it's something that I can only imagine.
But that's why we have all these different activities, why we act as venues for different things, because we need that income to keep this in the shape it's in at the moment. We have that responsibility.
We do, and we do here. We feel it actually, and we've actually asked the construction crews that are preserving the Ren Church to stop during this webcast, because this morning before we went on air, there were jackhammers and noises. We're doing the same thing here to make sure that these wonderful old buildings, these eyewitnesses to history, continue to be around to inform and to inspire new generations. So, while not on the grand scale of Blenheim, we certainly know exactly what you're talking about here, as we're devoting roughly $6 million to the preservation of the Ren Church, which is something that, as you say, it's on our watch, and if we can, as historians, know that 50, 100, 200 years from now, someone will look back and say, "I'm glad they did what they did." That's part of our job.
And I think also, if you look at the craft skills, because you need stonemasons, you need wood carvers. There are all sorts of things that you wouldn't come. And so it is important that there are apprentices and people that are still learning these fantastic crafts. They're so important.
They are, and what I like about what you're doing and your approach is that the old world craftsmanship in these trades can be supplemented by 3D printing and models and AI. I mean, it's using the old and transforming it in creative ways, and it's really extraordinary that the work that you and your team, everyone at Blenheim, are doing in that regard, to bring the new, to keep things fresh. History is never old at Blenheim, which I love.
No, it's not.
Well, our time is drawing to a close here, Antonia. I thank you so much for taking your time and sharing this. I know that we have your roving reporter, Pete, is in the galleries. I'm wondering if we can see where he might be, and if he could give us a few glimpses. I know we've had some spotty internet connection here, and maybe we can at least give some of our viewers a little bit of a tour if Pete's still around.
Yeah, no, he's still here. He's still here. He's just waiting to be connected, and then he'll go for a little walk through.
Okay, I think we've got him now.
Okay. There we are.
Yeah, so tell us what we're looking at.
Okay.
And I can chime in too if the
one of the staterooms. This is meant to represent the library and his books, etc. And of course, he earned his living by writing to start with. So it's very important that we represent that. And then we're just walking through. Wedding. And
are those love letters there? Oh, yes.
Yes, they are indeed. And then this area represents Winston was instrumental in one of the greatest weekends of the 30s. So in 1930, King Edward VIII, the one that abdicated, he was present as well with Ernest Simpson and Wallis Simpson. And that's when they discussed Ernest Simpson divorcing his wife and then leaving her free to marry the king, or the Duke of Windsor as he became. That's Nanny Everest, Winston Churchill's nanny. There are his parents. That's his little sailor suit. And I think, Pete, if you could zoom in on that portrait. I absolutely adore this. It's a portrait of Winston aged 4. And you can see his lovely auburn ringlets. And we have them preserved for posterity. They're part of the exhibition here.
That's really one of my favorite portraits of Winston Churchill too, and I often show it when I'm speaking about Winston Churchill in reproduction. And the long flowing hair was quite common in the day, but it's Churchill by the eyes, those blue eyes in that portrait. We see it, and we don't always realize that Churchill, black and white photographs and newsreels, but Churchill had these really glaring blue eyes, and you can definitely see it in that portrait.
Yeah, it is. And there are his curls.
A little bit of Churchill.
So there we are.
Little Churchill, right?
Yeah. So back to the beginning of his life.
Well, thank you for the tour, and thanks Pete for doing that. Here at America's National Churchill Museum next week, we're opening an exhibition that will be opening in September and being remain on view through January 12th about Churchill and Blenheim, where we'll show our model and some of the other materials to celebrate the anniversary of Churchill's birth. And I have to just thank you personally, Antonia, and your team for all of the extraordinary work and encouragement and images and research that you've helped us to be able to share with North American audiences a little bit of what you do here at America's National Churchill Museum. So as we put the final touches on our exhibition here, we're thinking of you and thanking you and your whole team. So please extend my, and on behalf of all of us here, this is a special relationship, and I hope we can continue to do work together in the months and years ahead.
Okay, and thank you, Tim. That was a pleasure. Lovely to see you again, and I hope to see you in October.
Exactly, when we will be back in London. For those of you who are interested, there is the International Churchill Conference happening in London in October, which is a gathering of those who are interested in Churchill. There's more information about that on the Churchill Museum website. That actually day, we're doing a special event in London at the Aldermanbury Garden, where this church once stood in London, is a garden now. It's a green space. And we're dedicating that garden, or rededicating that garden. We've helped here's a wonderful image we're showing our viewers of some of the officials from Westminster College standing in the garden when the church was still there. But we're refreshing and rejuvenating that garden on October 26th, the Saturday of the Churchill Conference, which is something that we're all looking forward to. So any of those who are watching or tuning in from the UK, if you're near London on October 26th, we'd love to see you back in the old neighborhood where this church once stood. And of course, we'd like to thank all of our viewers for tuning in and watching and supporting. Our members of America's National Churchill Museum are those who help us keep the bills paid and allow programs like this to happen, and allow exhibitions like the Churchill and Blenheim exhibition that will be opening next week. We couldn't do it without our members, and we thank them all a great deal. So once again, thank you, Antonia. Thank your team. Please thank Pete for the tour.
Pleasure. I will.
And
best of luck with your exhibition.
Well, thank you. It's good material.
It is.
All right, signing off here from America's National Churchill Museum at Westminster College. This is Tim Riley. I'm joined today by Antonia Keaney, live from Blenheim Palace. We look forward to seeing you. If you enjoy this video or these podcasts and webcasts that we're doing, make sure you give us a like on YouTube, and we'll make sure that we continue to send you the latest and greatest about Churchill from here at America's National Churchill Museum, but also with partners like Blenheim and around the world. Thanks again, everyone.